Continuing my series of videos concerning a possible Nintendo Direct this month and what the future may hold for Nintendo through the rest of 2026, we need now to talk about Mario. So far this year, everything has been in the shadow of the Super Mario Galaxy movie, and the plan for the Italian Everyman has been pretty much pinned down as of the September Direct from last year. From here, though, we can expect to see Nintendo try to ride the wave of the movie with some bigger announcements. For comparison, in 2023, they followed up the original movie with three key Mario Universe titles being announced: Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Super Mario RPG, and Princess Peach Showtime. Now, of course, Nintendo can't perfectly predict their game schedules and get everything to line up just so, but it's not like the film release caught them unawares. They've known for 3 years pretty much that the aim would be for a release in 2026, and they've known far longer that if the first movie were to be any kind of success, that they would need games to ride the wave of a sequel movie, which would likely be 3 years after the first one. Besides, it's the second holiday season of their new console. Of course, Nintendo is going to have some major Mario action. But what will Nintendo actually have? I've covered many of these possibilities in a range of prior videos, so let's recap my thinking first before we move on to some new thoughts and analysis. A lot of potential Mario titles we can just rule out. Dr. Mario is possible, but too small to really excite the scorers, although I do think the developers are overdue a game, so we could see something of that vein as a smaller side project. Mario Party would be pretty big, but the last game was too recent, and they've still had Super Mario Party Jamboree being sold on the Switch 2 from the Nintendo Switch 2 edition, available soon after the launch of the system. We're obviously not getting a new Mario Kart, but Mario Kart DLC is possible. However, it still feels potentially a bit early. Mario Kart World is evidently designed as a generational title, and I feel like we're more likely to get modest free updates for a while instead of a new expansion, although I have speculated before that a sequel to Mario Kart World in the form of a Mario Kart Galaxy would be pretty appropriate as a Super Mario Galaxy movie tie-in, and this could be done as DLC. Paper Mario, Mario & Luigi, Mario plus Rabbids, and Super Mario RPG are all, for various reasons, unlikely. Even if they could get a Paper Mario going, the likeliest option I'd say of these, onto the books for 2026, I don't think Paper Mario is going to be the most logical follow-up to the film, given its quite different aesthetic. I will say that the Pictonico, from the same team being relatively small scale, may make a Paper Mario game sooner than we might expect as the default, which will be 2028, a little bit more likely. A Brothership Nintendo Switch 2 edition is also slightly more plausible in the short term, especially given that the Mario and Luigi series was putting out Plus games years before it was cool, but I still think it's not necessarily the most exciting thing that they could put out this holiday. In sports terms, we've had tennis fever, and I've discussed recently why golf seems to be a long way off, but there is an outside chance to be had on strikers getting a raised profile for the Football World Cup. Baseball I've covered in a bespoke video as well. Basically, the core team behind that game has long been scattered to the wind. If there's a team that's likely to take on a new project, it could well be Nintendo Cube, the Mario Party team, and they are probably overdue a bigger game, so I wouldn't rule out something from baseball, and it's the kind of title that I could see Nintendo fitting in, but all things considered, I think both that and basketball remain quite long shots. As well as doing Mario Party games, of course, Nintendo Cube do have a team that are working on titles between times, such as Clubhouse Games or Everybody 1-2-Switch, so seeing something from them would not be enormously surprising. But having said that, while they've supported on a number of smaller interstitial projects recently, such as Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, something of the scope of Mario Baseball would be a significant scale jump for them, but, still possible. Of course, the last time we've seen Mario dabble with diverse sports was on the 3DS Sports Superstars game, but it's tricky to see something like that returning just at the moment, given that the team behind that are better known as the Sakurai team at Bandai Namco, behind Air Riders and Super Smash Bros. Then, of course, there's something in the spin-off range, and the most obvious of these being Luigi's Mansion 4. Long-time viewers will know I'm cooler on the prospects of Luigi's Mansion 4 coming than most. Yes, 4 years is a relatively long fallow period from next level games, but we know the team is expanding, and we've seen long such periods where teams go through that process of splitting down in order to be able to support multiple teams at once. Most recently, look at how Goodfield went 5 years without a Nintendo game, but then released 2 in the space of 3 years. Luigi's Mansion is a huge property for them. I think it's understated actually how big it is because it's under the Mario umbrella, but if it weren't, it would be at least as big for them as Splatoon, and the odds have to be significant that we will see a Luigi's Mansion film in the not too distant future. For this reason, I could see Luigi's Mansion splitting down into multiple games at some point, perhaps with the Scarescraper concept spun off into something more expansive while the one-player game expands in scope considerably. Obviously, Luigi's Mansion has to be a decent shout for this year under any circumstances, but all that said, on balance, I think it's likelier that Luigi's Mansion will be saved for another opportunity. This leaves two teams producing Mario games to consider, but to be fair, they are the biggest teams. EPD8 of the 3D games and EPD10 of the 2D and Maker games. The one with no significant history of late is EPD10. Sure, we had Meet Up in Bellabelle Park, but they've often done this kind of thing before. We had New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe only 5 months before Super Mario Maker 2, and I wonder if history could repeat with a Super Mario Maker 3 soon after a gloss-up of a previous Super Mario Bros. Title. If they did want to finally break into the 3D design space, then they already have the perfect leader for such an endeavour in Koichi Hayashida, the director of Galaxy and 3D World. Even if they did a 2D design mode with Galaxy-style mechanics, I think this would be quite huge, and of course we've seen Zelda features be added to Mario Maker before, so they could keep adding patches to tie it into the Zelda movie over the coming 6 to 12 months to keep it relevant. It's a perfect model game as well for mouse mode, and the development period of 3 years would be fairly consistent with what the team has done before, especially when you consider that this likely is one of those games which will receive a year or so regular post-launch content and will heavily iterate on Super Mario Maker 2 as well. I'm not saying Super Mario Maker 3 is in the absolute sense likely, but I think of all the contenders here, it does feel to me to be the most plausible. However, one oddball long shot that I have mentioned a long time ago, but I will come back to, something linked to Super Mario Galaxy, but not necessarily quite the way you expect, so hear me out. Koichi Hayashida came over to support EPD10 around 2018 or 2019, judging by his credits on the 28 EPD8 games and the 2019 EPD10 games. Now, he was a pretty significant figure because he was actually the producer of EPD8, so incredibly senior in Nintendo at that point. Now, his major contribution in EPD10 so far has been to get the 2D team licked into shape for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, but while he's a massively senior figure of the company, he didn't direct that game, and it feels to me like he was very much in the engine room rather than organising. He was given a fairly senior credit, but he wasn't actually the person in charge of any of the core aspects of that game. But if you wanted Galaxy 3 to follow a movie, and why wouldn't you, Hayashida would be the obvious choice to lead such a project, either as a producer, probably not as a director, but at any rate at some kind of very senior level. And we know from Donkey Kong Bonanza and Tomodachi Life recently that Nintendo is perfectly content to simply build new teams around developers, and Hayashida would be an obvious person to be able to do this. He has the seniority, he has the experience of building up a team because he was one of those people who went over to Tokyo to set up EPD8 in the first place. We also know that there is a reliable development team at Nintendo that is now quite experienced on supporting with 3D Mario, specifically the Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury and the Switch Super Mario Galaxy 1 plus 2 devs, Nintendo Software Technology in Redmond. So if Nintendo did require some support, then I'm sure the Redmond group would be a trusted group to call upon. Let's say Hayashida was heavily involved in prototyping Wonder in 2019 and 2020, but since 2021, he has pivoted to building his branch group. Now, it's perfectly plausible that after 4 or 5 years, he could be ready with some kind of Galaxy-themed title, not necessarily Galaxy 3, which would, I would suspect, compete with the prospect of the next Mario game, but I do think it could be something that is in the universe, albeit broader scale than the full 3D Mario, something that would complement it rather than compete with it. So, for example, some kind of smaller course-based title which focused perhaps on multiplayer with Rosalina and other kinds of content might be something that they could do. They could also make it more 2D focused and do a Super Mario Bros. 2D game that just happened to use the Galaxy mechanics, something that they haven't really done so far, although of course there were elements of Galaxy 2 that did use 2D scrolling. I think if they could max out sales on a Super Mario Galaxy game now and still tease for people that there is something much bigger coming after with a big EPD8 reveal, something which does feel quite likely, then it seems like a plausible option for them to go big on a Super Mario Galaxy spin-off this holiday season. As to the specifics, obviously, it is very hard to say, but I do think that a game with playable Luigi, Toad, Peach, Daisy, and Rosalina would be a very great way for them to showcase game chat and game share, and to build a title which would feel significant but also completely different to a mainline 3D Mario title, something a little bit closer to 3D World, or perhaps somewhere between 3D World and Wonder, possibly not even with the Mario branding if they decide that they want to focus more on Rosalina, Peach, and Daisy. But in any event, a game which would be a significant holiday title and one that I'm sure would sell pretty well. In some respect, a new Super Mario Galaxy would feel like overkill, and that's not something that Nintendo tend to do. They tend to keep their big announcements to make the most of them, and of course they've already got Super Mario Bros. Wonder to exploit in the 2D Mario department, and I don't think they feel that they have done selling that game yet, and of course they do have a new EPD8 game on the way. But all that said, if there's one property where they can comfortably keep producing games, it is Mario, and now does seem like a perfect time for such an announcement with the film so recent. I think it's probably in the too good to be true category to have some kind of Galaxy game, even a 2D style one this year, but I can't get over the perfect synchronicity, so it wouldn't entirely surprise me either. They clearly rushed a Star Fox game into development to benefit from Fox's cameo in the film, so why wouldn't they plan around having a smaller scale Galaxy title, especially given that Koichi Hayashida is on hand to develop one with his vast experience of both Galaxy games and 3D World. One option, of course, is that we don't just have a single game, but if we follow the model of 23 to 24, then we get a whole slew of games being announced. Super Mario Maker 3 would be the equivalent of Wonder, the tentpole title of the holiday. Some kind of Rosalina smaller scale Galaxy title would be the equivalent of Princess Peach, and in lieu of the Super Mario RPG remake, we might have a Luigi's Mansion 3 Plus game, something which I still think is quite plausible if the plan is for Luigi's Mansion 4 to follow, not this year or next year, but possibly a little while hence. Now, all of this is very difficult to unpick in terms of probabilities. I think EPD10 is the best, most likely group to deliver a game for this holiday season, but even that's probably just about half likely. Within that, you'd expect Mario Maker to be the easiest type of game to be ready at relatively short notice, but I also think they will want something following up Princess Peach Showtime to appeal to the young girl section of their emergent audience, and we also know that multiplayer smaller games are quite possible in this era of variable pricing. However, if they do have a major Mario lined up for February or March, or even May to be the Tears of the Kingdom to the Zelda film Super Mario Bros. Movie, then I suggest that they could go with a more restrained Mario lineup with smaller titles, but still fun ones, Mario Baseball being the obvious kind of game which could slot in. But all that said, it is Mario. Nintendo really has no compunction at all about multiple concurrent games. But also, I've only delved at the moment into the concepts we know about. Infrequently, Nintendo launch brand new sub-brands of their Mario line. They haven't really done this on console since Mario Plus Rabbids back in 2017, or possibly Mario Kart Live Home Circuit if you class that as separate from core Mario Kart. But of course, we've also had Hello Mario, and in terms of complete spin-offs, Princess Peach Showtime in 2024. I think, therefore, that there's a decent chance of something this year or early next year which could easily be announced, and while Rosalina is the obvious choice for such a focus, I do wonder if they might look at a completely different genre for Mario than he has had for quite a while. They've been doing a lot with cozy games and evidently have a significant cozy game audience between Tomodachi and Pocopia and Animal Crossing, and I do wonder what something that is broadly cozy in the Mario series would be. Obviously, they don't want to carve up their audience of their existing games, that would be a Pyrrhic victory, but perhaps something gentle where you ride Yoshi around the Mushroom Kingdom solving puzzles, using searching, crafting and building. Well, I think that could be quite interesting. To my knowledge, we've never actually had a game where Mario focuses on plumbing and building, and while I doubt we will have that exactly, obviously not counting Mario Maker, the chance to do something a bit more open would definitely be there. And I've said before that I think a Mario Paint style project to showcase mouse mode remains decently likely, and in that case, it's just a matter of when. I think a lot of this comes down to when we would expect the next 3D Mario to actually be launching. In a sense, it would make sense for it to be a holiday game, but if the Pokemon game is going to be the big 2027 holiday season seller, then I'm not sure they need to have a Mario game in that holiday window, and if they could release it in the summer, then that frees them up to have a more modest lineup for 2026, perhaps some kind of painting game, perhaps something in the Mario Maker field, and possibly something that is a spin-off which focuses on Rosalina as well. At this point then, let's map out some forecasts. I'm going to say 90% there is at least one new Mario game announced in the next Direct, whenever that may be. 70% the next 3D Mario is teased in the next Direct. 50% 2 new Mario games are announced in the next Direct. 30% at least 3 new Mario Universe games are announced in the next Direct. Also 30% at least 1 game developed or supervised by EPG 10 staff releases by the end of 2026. 30% Koichi Hayashida is credited on a Super Mario game before the end of 2027. 30% a Mario spin-off or new Mario series is announced in 2026. And 10% Mario Kart World paid DLC comes in the next Direct. At any rate, those are my thoughts for the time being. Please do check out some of these other videos on screen, and of course do check out the Patreon for early ad-free and exclusive content, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.